Hello, dear partners, and all those who are interested in what is going on in Ukraine, not in the Ukraine. The Ukraine means a part of something larger. So now in Ukraine, we say in Ukraine, not in the Ukraine. So just for your information. And today is our second webinar on Russia-Ukraine war, and we will hear women voices. And I see with the number of participants that men voices were probably more important 2 weeks ago rather than women voices. I hope that maybe we'll have more such conferences and seminars with our dear women, and that we will have as many people interested in women voices altogether as with men voices. Before we begin, I would like to read to you a part of the letter from my sister, who is with her small kids, a refugee now. And she texted, I share this in our WhatsApp group with the partners, but I will just read a small portion. Ukrainian women are divided. The war cut us to pieces like a pie. Rather, it did not cut us apart, but tore us apart, and then stretched us on different territorial and ideological plates. It divided us into those who fled Ukraine from the war, with or without children, with backpacks, minimal amount of things, or with no things at all, and those who consciously stayed at home with their children, and those who stayed at home because they could not say goodbye to their husbands or parents. They are not really ready to live indefinitely outside of Ukraine in conditions of uncertainty. And those choose to save Ukraine, not their children, or save Ukraine for the sake of their children. And we have women who do not have the opportunity to go somewhere. And worst of all, those who fell under the rubble of houses, became hostage to the circumstances of the war, hiding from the shelling. Those who left begged, those who stayed to live, those who stayed condemned those who ran away, or just the communication with them. Those who are blocked by circumstances or by the Russian occupiers, in general outside all of groups I mentioned before. This does not mean that any of us women is bad or inadequate or cold-blooded or is panicking. This means that we are all different, and that the visibility from our positions is different, and the task of each is different. Each of us has one life. Each of us has her own threshold of sensitivity, her own mechanism of living through panic, fear, change. And it does not depend on another person. It is something that is impossible to predict in advance. And then she concludes, each of us has our strengths. And over time, we have come to understand and love each other. We learned a lot from each other. And now when we are waiting to fly to another country and live in different villages and different families, I'm very sad. Because we have already adapted to live together. We have adapted to each other. We learned to help each other. Now we will have to go through this process again and again with new people. And we don't know how many more times we will have to do it. But it was our choice. And today we have with us 6 women voices which will share from their circumstances. And I would like to now give the time to Evelyn. Ksenia, could you please introduce her?
Are you
ready?
Yeah, I am ready.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Frankly, when Taras asked me to participate in this panel briefly, I wrote some words and they seemed completely inadequate as I watched the Zoom screen fill with my sisters and brothers in Ukraine. Thank you for the privilege of being with you today. But I'll read what I have here and know that there is so much more heart behind it. On the morning of February 24th, my husband and I woke up to the news that Russia had invaded Ukraine. My husband's family is Slovenian. He had spent time in Russia in college. As Scholar Leaders staff, I had been closely following SL's work with seminaries in the region. In fact, that week of February 24th, Taras Dietlik and Evan Hunter from SL were in Moldova to meet with various seminary leaders to encourage and take counsel with them. As tensions grew early that week, those meetings were canceled and SL staff became very concerned. So the news from Ukraine that dark morning filled us with nauseating horror. We watched Russian helicopters shelling Kiev. We saw kids who looked just like my husband's high school students hiding in basements. We saw women picking up guns to defend their country. Our grief, rage, and frustration have not abated. That morning, SL staff had our regular weekly call. It was supposed to be about onboarding our new president, but most of us could barely hold back tears. Lynn, our CFO, read from Psalm 9. The Lord reigns forever. He has established his throne for judgment. He rules the world in righteousness and judges the peoples with equity. The Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. Those who know your name trust in you, for you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you. Sing the praises of the Lord enthroned in Zion. Proclaim among the nations what he has done. For he who avenges blood remembers. He does not ignore the cries of the afflicted. That morning, we prayed for Evan as he joined the many people exiting the region, and we prayed for Taras as he returned to Ukraine. Since then, we have prayed the psalmist's words for Ukraine over and over, as we have seen Christ's strength and majesty reflected in the Ukrainian people, especially in Ukraine's women. Women are choosing to remain with their husbands under fire. They are sheltering in subways and basements for hours with children and elderly parents. When the sirens stop, they are coming out to care for one another without the help of schools or other community resources until the next siren. They are scrambling to find food and medicine to comfort children and animals terrified by the sound of rocket fire. Women are overseeing shipments of weaponry and food and the flow of refugees out of Ukraine. Most of those refugees, as we just heard, women, taking their children alone on days-long journeys, leaving their husbands behind to seek shelter among strangers. Women are ministering in hospitals, which are often targets for the shelling. Women are taking up arms to fight back the invaders. And not to be cliche, but as we all know very well, it was a woman early in the war who put sunflower seeds in Russian soldiers' pockets, whose courage the whole world has seen. As so often happens in our lives as women, Ukraine's women are carrying many responsibilities at once. We all know what it means to have a husband, parents, children, church, a household, even a couple of paying jobs as well. But these women are shouldering that load while walking through the valley of the shadow of death. That shadow shapes and adds to their load. Thank you, sisters, for sharing from your experience of the war today. May the Lord hear our cries. Let's pray together. In you, O Lord, do we take refuge. Let us never be put to shame. In your righteousness, deliver us. We trust in you, O Lord. We say, you are our God. Our times are in your hand. Rescue us from the hand of our enemies and from our persecutors. Make your face shine on your servants. Save us in your steadfast love. Lord, we pray that you would be a refuge and a deliverer for Ukraine. Please fill the hearts of your people there with your love and boldness. Please protect their lives. Please guide those of us who are so far away, who long to support Ukraine, to do so in ways that will truly help them fight for peace. Please bless the women who speak now as they talk to us and in their ministries. Sustain them in hope. Please, Lord, end this war. Let your people in Ukraine be strong, and let their hearts take courage as they wait for you. In Christ's name we pray together. Amen.
Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you for your prayers. Evelyn is the Director of Leader Studies at School Leaders International. This is our partners that helps and support us a lot. Thank you, Taras. Thank you, Evelyn, for your words and prayers. And thanks everyone who joined us today. Thank you for your willingness to listen, to hear, and to share with us our pains, tears, and that is most important, our hopes for the peaceful sky above the Ukraine and above all the countries that stand together today with Ukraine, stand against the terrorism that neglects the freedom, and not only the freedom, but the life of the other. Today we are going to have two main sections. The one section will be dedicated to the voices of our today's speakers about their experience of the war. And the second section will be dedicated to the answers to questions that we received from our participants. And now I'd like to introduce today's first speaker. This is Marina Ashikmina. Marina is a Vice Rector for Educational Work at Tavria Christian Institute. She is also a psychologist who works with the people with post-traumatic stress disorder. And today Marina will be sharing with us her experience of this war and her thoughts on the role of women in the war with a human face. Marina, we wait to hear from you. The floor is yours.
Дякую. Війна – це жах, руйнування, смерть, горе, насилля, кров, соціальна, емоційна та духовна девіація. Війна прийшла в Україну нині, маючи нелюдське обличчя. Її спотворене відображення ми спостерігаємо усюди. Війна проникає до культури, гублячи ту романтику та героїчний пафос, який її облаштували поети, драматурги та кінорежисери. Війна змінює людину. Від особистісної самоідентифікації до свідомої національної ідентифікації змінюються цінності, парадигми світосприйняття та система координат. Відбувається переосмислення трансцендентності та іманентності Бога, богообраності та милості Божої. Наразі війна – частина культури в Україні, в якій існують українці. Вона стала центральним ядром українського суспільства зсередини. Війна – це пригнічення, приниження та дискримінація, продукт патріархальної системи. Але якби війна мала голос, то вона звучала б стогоном жінок, плачем дітей від страху, тихою молитвою матері. Який жіночий голос війни? Чи наповнений він мелодійністю та співучістю? Чи має зовсім іншу тональність? Чи, можливо, він замовчується? Так, ще у 1980 році лауреатка Олексійович влучно зазначила: все, що нам відомо про війну, ми знаємо з чоловічого голосу. Суспільні наративи сформували нам чоловічий образ війни, чоловічі перемоги та, власне, чоловічу статистику військових подій. Слід зазначити, що українські жінки на рівні з чоловіками брали участь у протестах Євромайдану у 2013-2014 роках, причому в усіх видах її діяльності, у тому числі у мілітарній діяльності, формуючи так звані жіночі сотні. Війна змінює жінку, вона змінює відношення до себе, до оточуючих. Наразі жінки також воюють, про що неодноразово свідчать медійні повідомлення. Але, на жаль, актуальним залишається питання видимості жінок та визнання їхньої ролі на рівні з чоловіками, як з боку держави, так і з боку суспільства. Жінки в умовах війни з нелюдським обличчям свідомо беруть подвійну відповідальність. Писання дає нам багато ілюстрацій, коли жінки відігравали неабияку роль у розбудові держави та миру. Так, 4-та книга суддів 21-го розділу ілюструє нам непересічний образ Дівори, за якою пішов військовий атаман Варак. Незважаючи на те, що вона була жінкою, її внутрішня сила була набагато більшою, ніж Варака. Завзятість, Неординарність вирішення та й неймовірну силу духу ми бачимо в образі Яїл, яка зробила чоловічий вчинок, не викликаючи підозру у ворога, і взяла Яїл, жінка Хеверона, наметового кілка, і взяла в свою руку молотка, і підійшла тихо до нього, та й всадила того кілка в його скроню, аж у землю. А він спав, змучений, і він помер. Жінки виконують так звану репродуктивну працю, плетуть маскувальні сітки, допомагають вимушено переміщеним особам, готують їжу військовим, возять з-під кордону медикаменти, готують коктейлі Молотова для територіальної оборони власних громад, займаються перекладом новин для іноземних ЗМІ. У патріархальному суспільстві репродуктивна праця, закріплена за жінками, вважається малопрестижною, майже неоплачувана і непомітна. Разом з тим, це великий шмат роботи, без якої публічну працю складно уявити, та яка, власне, наближає Україну до перемоги над країною-агресором. Але війна, яка здатна деперсоніфікувати чоловіків, як це ми бачимо у світового класика Ремарка, ми перевтілились у страшних звірів, ми не б'ємося, ми рятуємо себе від знищення, не змінює жінку. Під час війни жінка лишається жінкою, емоційною, чуттєвою, надихаючою. І саме під час війни вона стає більш незахищеною. І водночас вона повинна поєднувати у собі і жіночість, і мужність. У публічному дискурсі для жінок очікується передусім ролі, пов'язані з материнством і красою. Роль матері стає ще більш актуальною у ситуації національної боротьби. Завдання матері – збереження психоемоційного стану здоров'я дитини, тому що війна – єдина травма, яка має глибинні наслідки у вигляді ПТСР із депресивними розладами. 85% дітей українців, відповідно до міжнародних статистичних даних, будуть мати посттравматичний розлад у поєднанні з депресивними та субдепресивними станами. В якому ж емоційному спектрі нині знаходиться жіночий ракурс війни? Це надто широка емоційна палітра. Кожна українська жінка сьогодні знаходиться у стані гострого стресу. Емоції та відчуття, які сьогодні притаманні жінкам, викликають полярний та широкий діапазон емоційних та фізичних відчуттів, починаючи від відчуття того, що я не розумію, куди йду, до більш глибокого питання «Хто я?», відчуття того, що сенс життя відсутній, що майбутнє відсутнє, неможливість робити те, що ми починали робити до війни, відчуття того, що всередині є у нас певні зони, які втратили чуттєвість, ніби заморозились. Звичайні речі виконуються часами, втрачається здатність до нормальної комунікації, або навпаки, постійна комунікація, раптова ненависть до певних речей, гнів і відчуття зради, роздратованість на дрібниці, напади екзистенційної самотності, відчуття чорного світу, так немов би хтось загинув, або навпаки, радість та полегшення, та раптове відчуття провини за ці почуття, ейфорійне піднесення або фізичні відчуття розірваності на шматки, втрата сну, або навпаки бажання постійно спати, кошмари, в яких мозок постійно грається жахливими малюнками. Всі ці полярні емоції є нормальними, відповідно до тих подій, які нині відбуваються в Україні. Кожна з нас стоїть сьогодні на колінах, але, як влучно зазначив Лінкольн, аби поставити націю на ноги, ми повинні стати на коліна. Кожна з нас немічна і актуальним для сьогодення, як ніколи, є вислів Чарльза Спенджера. Всі немічні знаходяться під захистом царя Сіону. Нехай вони поспішають вступити з ним до діалогу. Нехай дивляться на нього, бо він відшукує їх. Закликаю кожну українку вступити до діалогу із Богом, бо він відшукує таких, як ми, немічних та потребуючих прихистку згори. Thank you.
A womanly aspect of war. War is horror, destruction, death, sorrow, blood, violence, social, emotional, and spiritual deviation. And now in Ukraine, the war has shown its inhuman face. Its distorted features are reflected in destructions of all that we can see. It wrecks the architecture. It invades culture, corrupting romance and heroics that was so carefully built up by poets, playwrights, and film directors. It changes a person from self-identity to conscious national identity. It changes values, shifts worldview paradigm and value system. It triggers rethinking of God's transcendence and immanence, his election and mercy. At this time, the war has become a part of lifestyle for Ukrainians. It has worked its way into the very core of Ukrainian society. War is oppression, abasement, and discrimination, as it stands from patriarchal worldview. And yet, if war had a voice, it would sound like a woman's lament, a child's fearful cry, a mother's quiet prayer. What is a woman's voice of war? Is it still melodious and euphonious, or set in a very different tone? Or perhaps it's altogether silence. Even back in 1980, Nobel Prize laureate Svetlana Alexievich so aptly noted, all that we know of war is told by men's voices. Society's narratives create for us a manly face for war, victories of men, and war analysis from a man's point of view. Yet the war changes a woman. It alters the way she views herself and relates to others. For the record, Ukrainian women stood on par with men in Euromaidan protests that happened in 2013 and 2014. They participated in various initiatives, including militaristic ones, as the Women's Sotnya squadrons were formed. As evidenced by many media reports, even now Ukrainian women are on active duty, fighting as part of the armed forces of Ukraine. Yet we still must pursue the matter of recognition by both the government and the society as a whole, the presence and the role of women as well as men. When women come up against this war within human face, they take on a double responsibility. The scripture gives us many examples of women playing an integral part in strengthening the home country and promoting peace. We read in Judges chapter 4 about extraordinary Deborah, that war chief Barak deferred to, even though she was a woman, because her inner strength was bigger than his. Starting with verse 21, we read of audacity, exceptional decision-making, and an unbelievably strong will of Jael, who rose up to the occasion to do a man's job without rousing enemy suspicion. But Jael, the wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand. Then she went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground, while he was laying fast asleep from weariness. So he died. Women are involved in so-called reproductive labor. They weave camouflage nets, assist displaced persons, prepare meals for soldiers, transport medical humanitarian aid from drop-off at the borders. They make Molotov cocktails, petrol bombs, to arm their local territorial defense squad. They translate news for foreign mass media. In a patriarchal society, such reproductive labor is relegated to women as it's considered undistinguished, poorly compensated, and goes largely unnoticed. And yet, it is enormous behind-the-scene work that not only sets up success of more visible public work, but also advances Ukraine's victory over its invaders. But just as this war is able to dehumanize men, as Eric Maria Remarque once said, we've transformed into horrible beasts. We do not fight, but rather save ourselves from destruction. This war cannot do such thing to women. Even in the times of war, a woman is still a woman, emotional, sensuous, inspiring. And even though she is less protected, such times require of her to balance vulnerability and mettle, heart and guts, womanhood and heroism. Public discourse expects a woman to fulfill roles that are first and foremost connected to motherhood and beauty. The role of a mother is even more relevant when an entire nation is in battle. It is the mother's task to maintain psycho-emotional health, because the trauma of war experience will have long-term consequences like PTSD and depression. It is estimated that 85% of Ukrainian children will have some degree of PTSD and/or depression as the result of all they've been through. Today, every Ukrainian woman is under acute stress. Emotions and feelings can trigger a wide variety of emotional responses and physical symptoms. They bring forth questions ranging from where am I going to a much deeper who am I inside. Feeling that life has no sense or that the future is gone altogether. Realization that it is impossible to continue working on projects that began before the war. Feeling like parts of soul have lost responsiveness or sensitivity. all frozen on the inside. Simple tasks take hours to accomplish. Loss of normal communication, or inversely, constant contact. Outbursts of hate towards certain things, anger, and feeling of betrayal. Irritability over trivial things, bout of existential loneliness. Feelings like the world is coming apart, or that somebody died. Or inversely, joy and relief that is quickly followed by shame for having such feelings. Euphoria, physical sensation of falling apart. Insomnia, or inversely, persistent sleepiness. Continuous nightmares. Then one's mind is unable to shake off horrible images. Every one of us is kneeling prayerfully. But as Abraham Lincoln once said, for us to get this country on its feet, we must first get on our knees. Every one of us is weak. But let us heed to the encouraging words of Spurgeon. All the faint and weary are under protection of the King of Zion. Let them hasten and talk to him. Let them lift their eyes toward him as he is looking out for them. And I would like to encourage all Ukrainian women to spend time seeking God's face as he is searching for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina, for your strong and deep voice. And thank you for your encouragement for every woman. And thank you for your reminder that the war touches everyone without caring who is who. It touched the men, women, and kids. And the face of the war is really inhuman. And here is now our next speaker, Tanya Gerasimchuk. Tanya is a translator and assistant at Odessa Theological Seminary, and she is also working at Odessa Crisis Pregnancy Center. She will share with us her experience as a woman refugee, and we will think with her about the question, is it possible to find the words to pray for our enemy and what these words can be? Tanya, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. I'll speak from the perspective of an ordinary woman. I should probably tell a few words about myself. To what has already been said about me, I can add that I'm a mother of 2 daughters. I was born in Odessa, and almost all my life I've lived in this city. And whenever I thought about hypothetical reasons for hypothetical change of our place of residence, it had never crossed my mind that my family and I could move somewhere fleeing from war. However, here I am in Moldova, and even though we are staying at my husband's mother's house, I understand that our stay here is more than just being on a visit to our relatives. As days go by, I realize more and more that our current status gravitates toward that of refugees rather than guests. But when I was asked to share about my personal perspective on this war, at first I couldn't gather and structure what I thought and what I felt about this whole situation, because what does one think and feel at the time of a catastrophe? When the war began, I had the feeling like the infrastructure of all your life had been ruined. You're uprooted and you start to live in a place where you don't belong. And no matter how many good and nice and kind people you meet on your way or how comfortable your conditions are at the moment, the feeling of detachment is always there and never leaves you. Another feeling that I'm sure I and many other Ukrainian women possess now is a feeling of uncertainty about the future. It is next to impossible to make long-term or middle-term plans. And when you think you can at least make short-term plans, life can prove that you're wrong just like that. Because at the moment we are in Moldova, but no one actually guarantees that Moldova is not the next dish on Mr. Putin's menu. And when I think what to do with our lives next, I feel like I'm trying to solve an equation with too many unknowns. speaking more about feelings. I try not to think too much of the people in such cities as Mariupol, because I know that at this very moment, some child over there is probably dying terrible and slow and painful deaths from hunger, thirst, cold, or injury, whatever. And you feel sorry, you feel helpless, and you feel even guilty because you're fine and comfortable while others are suffering immensely. Do you remember this Bible text in Matthew 24? Woe to those who are pregnant and who are nursing babies in those days. At the time of wars, the fate of these vulnerable groups of people is often very tragic. And if your enemy is under the devil's control, and I personally think that Putin is under the devil's control, he doesn't think too much whom to kill. The point is to create the biggest possible destruction and pain. And the fact that you're living in the 21st century in civilized Europe doesn't mean anything at all. Separated families. This is another negative reality that millions of people are living in. Because husbands and grown-up sons have to stay in the country while their wives and children are somewhere else in safer places. Families become separated. And nobody knows for how long. I have my personal, very small experience. When the war started and our family decided to move from Odessa, my elderly mom refused to go. And this is common attitude of old people. Usually they say, we've lived here all our lives, we'll stay here, and we will die here. So we left our mom with one of our relatives and went. A few days later, we got the news that she had suddenly and rapidly deteriorated in health. And I was traveling back to Odessa, I was praying just for one thing, to find her alive by the time we arrived. Praise the Lord, in our case, we had a happy ending. We managed to stabilize her condition and persuaded her to go with us eventually. But in this scale of the whole country, separated families have become a painful norm that disrupts the millions of lives in Ukrainians. And however, amidst all this mess, there are some positive aspects. Firstly, the war is the time of intense experiential learning. It's a hard way of learning because you are learning from your own experience. You learn how to live in the given circumstances. You start to understand what is truly important and what isn't. You're restructuring your priorities. You learn to trust God more. And you praise God for great things, simple things that they used to take for granted. You praise God for great people, many great people with kind hearts whom you meet. You learn to rely on God's grace. You start to pray more. Actually, many people started to pray more. And I wouldn't be surprised if almost everyone in Ukraine is praying these days, both Christians and non-Christians. This war has touched every single person in Ukraine, every family, the lives of almost every Ukrainian. They're split into two parts, before and after the war began. When this war is over, as a speaker already said, the previous speaker said, people would be different from what they were before the war started. Many people would be totally lost and broken. Many would get PTSDs. Many would be driven to the point of suicide. And because of that, our country will also be different. I'm not talking about its territorial integrity, but I'm talking about the nation that has undergone incredible trauma, pain, and anguish. And I hope that this war somehow will change many of us for the better. This is what I pray for. And another thing, we begin to see the truth more sharply and clearly than ever before. We begin to notice not only the blackness of lies, but also the treacherous grayness of semi-truths, propaganda tricks, and soothing nonsense about how we as Christians should stay away from making any political statements or calling the Russian army our enemy because it's none of our business. Moreover, not only do we begin to see the truth more distinctly, but also we begin to feel the greater desire to make the truth known. As my husband, who is an Old Testament lecturer, said, quoting renowned scholar Walter Brueggemann, the practice of grief is an exercise in truth-telling. I agree. And I think our primary task now is to be faithful agents of God's truth in today's reality darkened by tremendous falsehood and distorted perception. And as a woman, I have certain fears. Just a minute ago, I talked about my hopes for Ukraine to change for the better. I fear that Russia won't change and people won't change. Many of them, the people that I used to respect, who are intelligent and well-educated, they sincerely believe that what Russia is doing is right. And this is a huge problem, because one thing is to sit quietly in your kitchen and quietly curse Stalin, say, and quietly drink vodka out of the feeling of despair, feeling miserable. And quite another thing is to feel comfortable about what Stalin is doing to justify him and drink vodka to his health. I want to say that there are too many Russians who drink to Putin's health and to cheer on his special military operation, so-called. It is a huge problem for both Ukraine and Russia, because it means that after this war is over, another war will break out as soon as they restore their army. They'll just do their homework and analyze their mistakes, and will start all over again. The people around the world are praying these days for Ukraine. A substantial part of my prayers now about Russia. They pray for Russia to change, and I don't ask God to make them miserable and poor or hungry or sick with all kinds of diseases. My prayer is that God would open their eyes somehow and something would change in their minds and their hearts. And the things that I've shared with you are a very light version of female war experience in comparison with what other women in Ukraine have gone through. When you listen to the testimonies of people who have managed to escape from Mariupol, they won't be about feeling you have when you lose your home. It will be feeling you experience when you lose your loved ones, when you see their body parts scattered around. I want to ask you to continue to pray for those who are staying in these besieged cities, for both civilians and soldiers. I understand that we're talking about praying for a miracle. However, when I listen to people who experience this hell, I see that God continues to produce miracles on the daily basis, and He is very good at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. I think that your testimony is close to the many women in Ukraine, and it's very close to my heart and to the situation of my family also. And we daily pray God with you, with the words that please change our hearts for the better in this condition, and let us see the truth around this propaganda that is around us, and let us be faithful to your truth. Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. She tried and helped a lot to build the bridges between different theological schools around Eurasia region. But 23rd of February has changed a lot Olga Dyatlik, Associate Regional Director for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, Overseas Council United World Mission. Olga, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Ksenia. Thank you, everyone. That's the first time I speak as I manage Zoom, so I will try to spotlight myself, sorry. It is so hard to find the right words, any words to describe the cruelty and terror that is being done by Russian soldiers and Russian Federation in Ukraine for this past 36 days, but also for this past 8 years. The Russian army continues to harm Ukrainian people every day and night. Russian aggression continues to ruin people's lives and homes since early 2014. After the annexation of Crimea in March 2014 and occupation of the territories in eastern regions of Donetsk and Lugansk, there are so much violence has been done by Russian and pro-Russian soldiers: kidnapping, rape, murder, occupation of the home, churches, theological institutions, and constant threatening people and country. As you've heard, a woman that was raped by many Russian soldiers in front of her little child in Mariupol for a few days recently died because of many wounds. As I continue to work closely with people who work in theological educational institutions in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, I used to speak to many faculty members who used to have their family members since 2014 on the occupied territories by Russians. One friend, she told me that when she was going to visit her mother in Lugansk region, she needed to stay in the bus, in the line for the checkpoint, more than 8 hours, and they didn't allow them to use the toilet. And last week, my friend, who was distributing food in Lugansk region, occupied territory, he was checked and undressed naked a few times because they thought that he has any nationalistic tattoo. And for people, if they do have so-called nationalistic tattoo, they imprison them. And these people are counted as disappearing. 24th of February, early morning, I woke up as most of Ukrainians and many people in the world with this cruel news. As my brother, he told me, "Oля, wake up, the war has started. Russia is bombing cities all over Ukraine." He told me this and left our home to join the army as paramedic. 24th of February, that's the day, exact day, 18 years since our cousin who was killed during the Maidan, the Revolution of Dignity, was killed by snipers that still are counted like pro-Russian snipers. And at that day, 8 years ago, there was a funeral in our city of Rivne for 20,000 people that we were honoring 3 people killed by snipers at the Maidan. This date of 24th of February is very dark personally for me. I suddenly was immersed in memories of 2014, of many funerals, as many flowers, and this bitter, sweet smell of millions of flowers that I hated for years. Since 2014, I was involved with my close friend Kate, in serving the families who lost their family members during the Revolution of Dignity and also in the war zones in Donetsk and Lugansk region. I remember the eyes of mothers, sisters, wives, children who were crying desperately, who couldn't say a word. They needed help. Me and my friend Kate, we were their voices for the local government to protect their rights, to speak with journalists, to speak with lawyers. And then, a few years later, me and my friend Kate found ourselves hopeless, burned out. We needed help ourselves to rebuild our mental health, to rebuild our routines, to rebuild our dreams for the future, and to find a new purpose to live. Since the first day of the war, full invasion of Ukraine by Russia on February 24th, I reminded myself that no matter how deep I will go with volunteering and helping people, then I need to take care of myself. But how can I, when I receive thousands of calls and text messages during the first 2 days with cries, please help us, please evacuate us. Our team of Eastern European Institute of Theology was deeply involved in evacuation and coordination of all evacuation during the first few hours and days and weeks. I remember the conversation with international African students being imprisoned in Kharkiv. They couldn't find a way to escape from bombing. By God's miracle, they made it to the last evacuation train before the city was bombed even harder. They made it to Kyiv, and Kyiv was bombed hardly. They sent me their location, and I was following their journey from Kyiv, which is very close to our city, but it took them almost 12 hours. Many international students were stuck in their cities because they couldn't live. As I receive many questions from people outside of Ukraine or Ukrainian immigrants, how will we work for reconciliation with Russians? Honestly and personally, I am not ready to work with them. Since 2014, even though our cousin was killed by sniper, my friends died defending Ukraine. I've seen so much pain. Me and our team, we've been carefully building bridges with Russians and Belarusians through different theological initiatives. We counted some colleagues as friends, but when the full-scale invasion, Russian invasion, happened 36 days ago, I understood that I don't have Russian friends. Any friend texted me sorry for the cruel things that Russia is doing. I believe that two sides, relationships are working two sides. We've been building bridges for 8 years, and now it's their turn to start building bridges. Otherwise, we will continue to build our own country, our beautiful souls, to find God and to treasure how God created us as Ukrainians, not as Soviet Unions. Russian invasion exposes hidden and painful wounds and memories of hybrid war that started in 2014. When a young man who escaped Irpin under shelling was telling his story to my friend suddenly was reminded of the event at the Maidan when he was shot by the sniper on February 20th, the exact date when our cousin was killed. Immediately, my friend felt guilty for comparing himself to his suffering. But it was the first time when he clearly was reminded of the tragedy that he experienced. How more hidden and painful wounds will be exposed to people? How will we respond to them, to these painful memories that we will experience ourselves? What I see a wonderful thing that church, which was very denominational till some moment, right now is losing its walls. And I like the quotes. I like to read the quote from the book written by Joshua Searle, Theology After Christendom, which I finished to read last week. In the coming years, we will witness a flowering of solidarity among diverse Christians as the walls of denominationalism and sectarianism come crashing down. Instead of institutional religion, there will be a gospel movement of compassion that expresses itself in a new vision of church without walls, and God will delight in this. I want to challenge us to break the right walls, to break the walls that separate us as human beings, but respect the national identity, respect our values as human being, not as so-called world holy Christian values. I'm very grateful for all my friends who helped to evacuate many people, many strangers, many Christians, different groups, Muslims, people with disabilities, to safe places where they can build their own lives. It is very difficult to be abroad as I continue to support many people who are in safe place, but mentally it's difficult for them to leave Ukraine. I also encourage you to take one person or a family and to guide them through a few years of supporting them in all ways that you can, like Taras did with Dima Shevchenko and his family, evacuating them from Donetsk in early 2015 under shelling. And as I was leading a group from Donetsk region with 6 kids, the pastor, and now they are safely in Germany. And I want to challenge you to stand against Russian propaganda in different ways, including so-called Bible ways. As Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were not asked to kill, to rape, to murder. They were asked only to fall down and worship King Nebuchadnezzar. But they didn't. They paid the price, but God saved him. I encourage you to advocate for Ukraine and to stand against Russian propaganda, to not bow, to not worship. And in the end, I would like you to not ask me questions like people asked who read Russian propaganda, because they say, why is God punishing Ukraine? That's not what I think. I recommend you to read the book The Shack by Paul Young, and also another book, Where is God When It Hurts by Philip Yancey. I find these books so helpful during many dark times of my personal life. And I thank you again for your courage and your brave actions that you take to support Ukraine and especially to support our team. I love you much, and I hope to see you in person sometime soon.
Thank you, Olha. Thank you a lot for your work, that you support Ukraine with all your heart, with all your actions daily, from day to day, from the prayer to prayer. Thank you for your testimony and for your open heart and clear position. And I share with you the idea that the war started not the 24th of February, but already 8 years ago. And for us, it's very important to remember this, that the price have been paid already, very big, and it's continued to be paid daily for our freedom, for the opportunity to live in the freedom in Ukraine. And sometimes it's really the right way, that something has to be completely destroyed in order to have the opportunity to be rebuilt in the new way, in a completely different way, and maybe to have more grounded foundations. And now I would like to represent us, the next speaker, Valeria Chornobai. Valeria is a graduate of the Ukraine doctoral program and a teacher of sociology in Christian ethics. Valeria is a person who does not try to convince people of the gospel by words, but she invites them by living her life. So her story is the gospel of daily life and actions. Valeria, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Ksenia. Probably I will also start with my story. For me, the word started a month before it had actually started with the dream in which my sister's husband and we were hiding from Russian tank. And it was so vivid. And when there were 3 big explosions in Dnipro early in the morning on February 24th, I knew that the war started. And also I knew personally that I should stay in Dnipro. I should not flee. But of course, my heart was troubled and in fear, because, you know, those explosions were really, really big ones and horrible. I was worried mostly for my sister's kids and my mom, for church. So our immediate decision was to make sure that my sister's kids and mom are in safety. So we sent them, as many other millions of Ukrainians, to the Western Europe, where they are settling now. Next, so we stayed, just like in my dream, we stayed, me and Dennis, her husband, stayed in Dnipro. And of course, we joined to the volunteers work. Next move of ours was to arrange the basements in my house and in church to be available and to be used as bomb shelters. My volunteer work started with the realization that there were many my personal friends from the Western Europe worldwide that were ready to contribute, and they were willing to contribute to help Ukrainians financially. But during the first week of war, the financial, like the bank system was not working properly in Ukraine. So the only way for them to help was to use my personal bank account in the Western European bank. So I just knew that I should stay for them to be able to help that way. And secondly, the reason also that I was confident, I was sure that I needed to stay, is that there was a need to rescue my older sister's friend's family from Kharkiv. And Kharkiv was then and is now being severely bombed. So we asked some pastor from Dnipro to go to Kharkiv to rescue them. So he did, and I settled them in my flat, in my apartment, and myself, I moved to my dad's house. So I'm kind of a refugee in a local scale. I admire those brave pastors, ministers, church ministers who keep doing that. So what they do and what we arrange now or help them do, coordinate them do, is they go every day and evacuate people from Kharkiv, from the war zones, from Donetsk regions, to then settle people somewhere. And so I admire those pastors who are willing to risk their lives daily by going to those war zones to evacuate people. And so this work we continue to do until now. Some people settled for a while at our church, and our church looks, I believe, as many other churches now. It looks more like a combination of a hostel and a warehouse where people live and where we store food and humanitarian aid. It's a little bit funny. And so this is my daily routine now. We receive trucks of humanitarian aid in church building. We make individual food parcels and have them distributed to people that are hiding in the basements of Kharkiv. We do daily. And on the second floor of our church, some refugees are constantly living. They come from the war zones, and so they are staying in church till they decide if they want to stay in Dnipro or they want to flee somewhere else, to go to the Western Ukraine or even further. Oftentimes, those refugees come to a church from the war zones having literally nothing. They have only their lives rescued, so they have lost everything. They have no spare clothes or shoes or bags or telephones, or their houses were totally demolished. So we give them food, water, a bed to sleep. We buy them clothes and shoes, telephones, so that they could get in touch with their family members. We also help them find proper jobs and apartments if they are willing to stay in Dnipro for them. So when it comes to our challenges, as Christians, we understand that this volunteer work is not just about meeting basic people's needs of food, clothing, and shelter. One night during the second week of war, I woke up with a clear understanding of what exactly I need to be doing, apart from feeding people, buying food, packing and sending food parcels, apart from evacuating people. You know, God told me that I need to be with the refugees to share some of their lives. So some refugees have lost their friends, as Olga said. They have lost their family members and they've seen death. And as they just come to us, you know, our church is settled at the train station. And even when they are evacuated by train or by car, they come to our church. It's kind of really close to the train station. So they come to us. And as they just come, they are not able to speak at all. They're devastated, they're in shock, they're grieved, angry. And as they just come to us, they're totally, you know, destroyed in the inner beings. And so when you see them, you understand that you don't need to talk to them. Like, you just need to sit in silence and, you know, share this pain in silence, or cry with them, or just hug them. And you need to be kind of sensitive, not to ask too many questions or not to preach at them, and yet to be able to bring this hope, this peace they need. Usually the next day, they are ready and willing to talk. So you come and you listen to them, pray for them. And emotionally, it's a hard work to do, to hear those stories, you know, to cry with those who cry, and just to see that, to listen to them. And yet it brings so much joy to me personally, to see them after, you know, you've shared the gospel, you've shared some good news, you prayed for them, you see them accepting Jesus as their Lord and Savior. It brings so much joy to me. Like the other day, one woman, and there were 6 women staying in my office. It used to be my church office, and so they were, you know, living there for a while. And I came to them, you know, it was like the next day they arrived from Avdiivka, from Donetsk region, from shelling, you know, crying, devastated. And I shared the gospel with them, you know, they received Christ, and they were so open, so willing to hear, and like they wanted me to pray for them. And I noticed that one particular woman was having troubles walking, like she had some problem in her physical problem. So I asked her what was the problem. She said she developed that problem after the second COVID shot. And, you know, I was so angry at the oppression of the devil, you know, at the works of the devil in that particular lady. So I just rebuked the symptoms. I just prayed for her, and I said, yeah, you're healed in Jesus' name. And I left home. The next day, the lady who is like a guard in our church, you know, there are ladies that guard in our church, keep watch. And so she called me and said, they left, those women, they left to go to the Western Ukraine. But you know what? She said, this lady whom you prayed for, she's totally healed. She can walk properly. And I was like, okay, we see those miracles here, although it's really hard emotionally to minister in such circumstances, but still it brings joy to us to see God doing something in healing people and giving them hope and salvation. Yet here locally we have a need of ministers ready to do this work. Just the other day we were making those food packages at church, and I found myself thinking that here I am, a church, doing volunteer work together with other 10 people. None of them but one was Christian. Church full of people that we consider to be non-Christians, or at least not church goers, but they are in church doing this volunteer job. We all together. There is no difference. And of course, it changes our concept of what is true love, what is true help. Of course, church people also come to help, but I wish there were more, especially brothers, ministers, who would be ready to share, to bring good news to the refugees, to the people in need. And to answer the question, what keeps us going, what helps us, motivates us, encourages us to do what we're doing, is from the very first day of war. I was trying to be diligent in two things. Personally, it was my habit before, and even more so now. But I was diligent to start every day, and I am diligent to start every day with the Bible reading. What helps me personally to stay focused on God's love, to meditate on scriptures, not to be focused on people's pain, because we hear lots of pain here. And second thing that helps me is to go on is that I avoid all the debates, all these talks popular in some Christian circles about why this war happened, who is to blame, and why God's punishing somebody. I just consider it a waste of time for me personally. It upsets me, of course, when I see Christians who refuse to cooperate with other Christians because of some divisions among them, because of some unresolved problems from the past. But there will always be some religious people who will play a role of a priest or a Levite on the road to Jericho, blaming that poor guy that you shouldn't have gone to the Jericho from Jerusalem or something like that. But I want to be with the Good Samaritan who just helped the person in need. So this is what we try to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Valeria, a lot. Thank you for your decision to risk and to act, to do daily this hard work. It's something that inspire and encourage us, not only to be the listeners, but also to be these kind of the good Samaritans. Lord, thank you. Thank you for the good news. And now I would like to represent our next speaker. This is Tatiana Kalmichenko. Tatiana is a sociologist of religion and promoter of series of dialogue, peace building, and conflict transformational projects. From her life and professional experience, she will share her story about what it means to be a woman, what it means to be the mother, what it means to be the volunteer, what it means to be a service woman in the middle of this war. Tanya, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ksenia, and thank you for everyone for listening and for me to make a testimony here. I'm actually calling for you from between Zhytomyr and Kyiv nowadays, because we are trying to stay here and to serve here as it's possible. War began for me in 2014 because I was in Maidan Square as a journalist, and then I began to travel with military chaplains a lot and stayed for more than 1 year on the front line on Donbass, where I met my husband, who is a professional officer who was injured in the first round of war. So for me, war is already for 8 years fully. And through these 8 years, I understand that it changed a lot, and it changed all the priorities of life, and it changed our vision in our hearts. And through this perspective and through new invasion of Russia, which started for me in Kyiv region, in Mykolaichi, it's near Hostomel, and Bucha and Irpin, and we are working for our community, which is still there under occupation since 27th of February. Started from shelling, which we heard before in Donbass, and it's impossible to imagine how it's now we get it in every region of Ukraine. And from my own perspective, now I'm in combination of serving, and it's again like I'm back in 2014, but now I'm back at my home, and now I'm experiencing more, not only being a wife of a veteran, but also not only being a volunteer, but also being an internally displaced person. As soon as we registered officially a status just 2 days ago, so let's get another identity, personal identity and experience. And I also stayed for 10 days, first 2 days near Hostomel under the shelling, and then we moved to another small village nearby Kiev, Severinivka, expecting to be more peaceful, but actually not. And we stayed for 10 days with my family and my 3-year-old son, and the dog, of course, there for 10 days without water, light, electricity, and connection. And I would say that's one of the most personal experience of being in silence and being sometimes without light and even without possibility to make a fire to prepare some food. So that's being in silence with yourself. And now volunteering for these occupied territories, which we get near Kiev, we are blessed to get experience to travel and to serve, and also we get experience of our interreligious communication. As soon as we are working together with Taras and with Olga, with Dialogue Connection initiative started in 2016, as it was a response that we need something more than just doing something with war and stopping the war. We need peace building as a process. We need a peace building as a conflict transformation. And the key question is here, what's next? So for us, it was already 8 years of this travel. And I would say that nowadays talking about peace, it's quite dangerous, and especially on Facebook, because you will be blamed in just 1 second that we don't need peace, we need a victory. But from my own perspective and from dealing with trauma and dealing with therapy and helping people through these 8 years, I would say that still we need peace. And we get this peace through our interreligious network of cooperation, because we started a chat as soon as we get different denominations and Christians and Muslims and Jewish, and some Buddhist people and other non-believers and agnostic people all around working in cooperation for dialogue and peace building initiatives on the ground. We started now again a chat for them to cooperate with each other. And that's the most blessing I see in my life, that it's possible not to think, are you, or which religion you came, how do you believe in God, how do you read Bible or not. That's all about being a person of God and person of peace heart, I would say. And now we get this miracle of cooperation of more than 40 people in one chat, that's possible to evacuate children. It's possible to help each other to get some products, to travel, to send some stuff and goods and just to help each other. And I would say that one of the main tasks would be for us just to get our hearts brave enough and honest to each other, and to be honest with ourselves, firstly, and to be honest in our prayers, especially if we feel anger, if we are in grief. That's okay for us to be. And we need to understand what next. And what's next will be for churches and for other religious organizations. And I would say that from my own perspective, I have a great dream of churches to be a place of peace for people, even non-believers, who can come there and to stay there. Because unfortunately, we do not experience it all the time, even now that it's possible to stay somewhere because you don't believe like others. And for me, I understand that peace building, that's right now it's not possible even to think sometimes, but we need to think about how to build peace with ourselves and how to build peace while you are staying under the shelling, and how to build peace in your heart during the silence, when you're ready to cry all the time, and when you're ready to shout, and when you're ready to run and go away. That's totally okay. And unfortunately, from my personal experience, I understand that the biggest wave of trauma we will get in months after the end of the war. Because right now we are mobilized, we're helping and we're serving and we're staying where we should stay. But as soon as we get this silence, and I encourage everyone to get this period of silence, of course, in safe zone after the war, just to ask ourselves what's going on and how to save peace in your own heart. And for me, praying nowadays, that's all about churches to be the place for God's silence and to be the place for everyone's silence, and to be honest and brave enough to understand what's going on in my heart and to listen to it where God is saying something to me, not to listen to any kind of propaganda or manipulation from external life. And I would say that still I'm in contact with my Russian colleagues, because I know someone who were fighting for 8 years with the Russian regime, who were arrested and who are still under arrest, fighting in some way in the informational field. That's, I would say, it's a mission of the person in peace building to stay on a bridge. And I know that Taras wrote a lot about it, and I agree with him that's something like you are staying somewhere in the other point. But it's not, peace building is not about position to be with everyone, but the position of being brave and honest with yourself, and to understand that today is our day of fighting, and today is our way of protecting our land and our souls. But there will be another day of understanding what's next, and what's next with our own generation. And what should I respond to my son, who is now only 3 years old, in his own perspective, how to build the future and how to talk. Because I know that from dialogue perspective, as a dialogue facilitator, that we need to talk, definitely. And one of the most biggest tragedy from Soviet period, that we were not talking about our tragedies, about our history, about family experience. So I'm praying for us to be able to talk. I'm praying for us to be able to keep silent with ourselves, to hear the voice of God, to hear our hearts, and still our hearts to be calm and soft enough to feel the love, even if we're already in deep pain. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. I would like to use this opportunity to thank you for your work, for your projects and the initiative for all these years, because your team, they really create the ground that help us today to face the war, face this condition, and in this condition to stay human. Thank you a lot. Thank you. And now I would like to represent our one more speaker, and how to move ahead, how to rebuild something that was mostly destroyed, and what is about the theology in this new condition. Does it have the future? About this question, we will think together with Olga Kondyuk. Olga is a head of the Department of Communication and Development at the Ukrainian Evangelical Theological Seminary. Olga, the floor is yours.
Всім доброго вечора. Коли почалась війна, я знаходилась на території Української Євангельської теологічної семінарії.
Good evening, everybody. When the war broke out, my family and I lived on the campus of the Ukrainian Evangelical Theological Seminary.
Марічка, а можливо трішечки ближче до мікрофону, чи мікрофон так, щоб добре чути
Так
було?
краще?
Дякую. Так, чуть можливо отак підтримати мікрофон. О,
Тарас
супер.
ловить.
Дякую.
Can you hear me now? How about now? All right, let's try this again. Good evening, everybody. When the war broke out, my family and I lived on the campus of the Ukrainian Evangelical Theological Seminary.
Наша семінарія знаходиться на самій окраїні Києва. Я зараз покажу деякі фотографії, щоб ви краще могли уявити ситуацію, в якій ми опинились.
Our seminary is located on the outskirts of Kyiv. Here is the map to give you an idea in what hole we ended up being.
Ми змогли виїхати з семінарії лише на 5-й день, тому що перші дні на всіх дорогах навколо нас велись бої.
We were only able to finally evacuate from the seminary on the 5th day of war because of intense fighting on all of the roads leading out of it.
На кемпусі було 70 людей, і ми займалися тим, щоб вивести ось таку велику групу людей у безпечне місце.
There were 70 people present on the campus, and we spent a lot of time trying to organize the evacuation of such a large group.
Ще до війни ми облаштували підвали у себе на кемпусі і запаслись їжею та пальним.
Even before the beginning of the war, we have set up shelters in our basements. We've stored up some food and gasoline.
Справа в тому, що у нас було тільки 2 підвали, і це було достатньо тісне приміщення для такої великої кількості людей.
But unfortunately, we only had 2 small basements, which wasn't nearly enough for such a large group of people.
Інколи обстріли продовжувались всю ніч, і потрібно було ховатись постійно. У деяких людей починалась паніка.
And sometimes the shelling would go on all night long. So all night long, we would have to stay in the basements, which has triggered a lot of panic attacks from the people.
І самим складним було утримувати таку велику групу людей в нормальному психологічному стані, тому що страх поширювався доволі швидко.
And the biggest challenge in that position was for us to keep everybody calm because the fear is contagious and spread very fast.
Кожного дня ми збирались для спільної молитви і щоб обговорювати плани на наступний день.
Every day we would meet up for prayer and discussion of our plans for the day.
На 3-й день ми змогли вивести невеличку групу людей. В основному це були жінки з маленькими дітьми.
On the 3rd day, we were able to evacuate a small group, mostly comprised of women and small children.
І на 5-й день ми змогли виїхати вже всі. У нас за нами приїхав великий автобус, тому що одна сім'я купила його за власні кошти.
And on the 5th day, we were able to evacuate the rest of the group because of the big bus that came for us that was purchased by one family precisely for this mission.
Частина людей, це ми зупинялись по дорозі в церкві одній. І, в принципі, всі, хто дізнавались, що ми їдемо через їхнє місто, то пропонували якусь допомогу. І ми бачили дуже багато жертовності серед українців.
All along our trip, wherever we had a stop, we had people welcoming us and asking whatever we can do to support you. We saw a whole lot of hospitality from Ukrainians on our way.
Зараз семінарія потерпіла від обстрілів і
At this point, the seminary campus has been shelled and is damaged.
Частина людей залишились в Києві для того, щоб допомагати людям. Частина команди семінарії, щоб допомагати людям і щоб допомагати військовим.
Part of the seminary staff and students has remained in Kyiv to assist and help in whatever way they can, help locals as well as the local armies.
Мені було дуже важко залишати Київ, тому що мені здавалось, що я зраджую своє місто. Мені здавалось, що я зраджую свою семінарію. Але мене переконав той аргумент, що моєму синові лише 10 років, І він тримався дуже мужньо ці 5 днів, але я не маю права залишати його в цих умовах довший час.
It was a hard decision for me to leave behind Kyiv, to leave behind seminary, because I felt like doing so would mean betrayal. But the thing that changed my mind was my son. He is only 10, and although he had been very brave handling the situation so far, I felt like it would be very unfair to continue place him in this danger.
Як тільки ми опинились у безпечному місці, то почали організовувати евакуації для інших людей. І той автобус, який вивіз нас, він зараз постійно їздить від Західної України до Києва і назад, щоб надавати допомогу багатьом різним людям.
As soon as we came to safety and settled in, we started organizing evacuation for other people in peril. And that bus that brought us from the seminary is in constant travels from western part of Ukraine to Kyiv and back, transporting people and transporting aid.
Декілька днів я займалася організацією евакуації, але потім все менше людей почали її просити. І я стала думати, що робити далі.
And at first, a few days we spent focusing mostly on how to evacuate people, but we have started receiving less and less requests for such help, which presented us with the next challenge. What do we do next?
І зараз би я хотіла поговорити про сьогодні і про майбутнє.
And I would like to expand on this idea of what do we have now in today's present, and what is the future that's going to hold for us.
На початку війни у мене була короткострокова мета супроводжувати ось таку велику групу людей у безпечне місце. Але потім я почала думати, яка моя мета далі.
Well, since at the beginning of the war, my first idea was I will assist with evacuation people to safety. But as the time went by, I was wondering, what am I going to do next?
І ось що я зрозуміла. Війна руйнує життя, і вона не лише вбиває людей, але вона руйнує всю життєдіяльність, все, що людина створює.
And this is the conclusion I came to. Any war ruins life. And it not only kills people, but it also destroys all manifestations of life, everything that people do or create.
Наприклад, багато людей, які зараз тут знаходяться, вони 30 років з нуля збудовували сферу богослівської освіти.
Well, for example, a whole lot of presenters on this panel has spent the last 30 years building up theological education in Ukraine, literally from scratch.
Наша семінарія зараз обстріляна. Семінарія в Херсоні захоплена. І я розумію, що нам треба боротися, щоб зберегти все те, що ми будували до того.
And currently our seminary near Kyiv has been shelled. Our seminary in Kherson has been taken over. And I realized that not only do we have to fight to survive, we also have to fight to preserve what we have built.
Нам не лише потрібно вижити, але нам також треба зберегти свою незалежність. Нам треба зберігати свою економіку, свої робочі місця, свою культуру і цінності.
So not only do we fight to survive, we also fight to win. We fight to preserve our independence. We fight to preserve our economy, our jobs, our culture, and our values.
Сьогодні я розумію, що маю зробити все необхідне зі своєї сторони, щоб наша організація вистояла.
My understanding today is that I have to do my best to maintain normal operations of our organization.
Можливо, здається, що богослів'я – це не перша річ, яка потрібна для виживання у війні.
It might seem that theological education is not on the forefront or of people's minds when they're trying to survive in the war.
Але я думаю інакше, і я би хотіла це довести.
But I'm of a different opinion, and let me show you why.
Кожна війна має ідеологічний компонент, і ця війна також.
Every war has this component of ideas, ideology, including this one.
10 років до того ми чули, як поширювалась пропаганда руського миру через засоби масової інформації для того, щоб підготувати свідомість росіян до цієї війни і виправдати військову агресію перед усім світом.
For around 10 years prior to start of this war, we have been watching the Russian authorities and mass media disseminating propaganda of the Russian world in order to prepare the worldview of the people and justify their aggression in the eyes of international community.
Пропаганда руського миру дуже часто використовує релігійну риторику.
As a matter of fact, the propaganda of the Russian world often makes use of religious notions, religious rhetoric.
Наприклад, такий простий меседж: росіяни і українці братські народи, братні народи.
Take, for example, a simple and often used notion that Ukrainian and Russian nations, Ukrainian and Russian people are brotherly nations.
Здається, все просто. Братство – це дуже добре. І хто за братство, той хороший і добрий. А хто проти братства, той поганий і злий.
And it seems a simple idea of brotherhood is good, and the one who supports such brotherhood is good and kind, and the one who opposes it is bad and evil.
Але за цим стоїть дуже велика підміна понять. Насправді, та людина, яка говорить, що ми братні народи, має на увазі наступне.
And it can very easily be misused by substituting the notions in this argument, as is often done by people who support this.
Ми братні народи, тому ми фактично один народ. А оскільки ми один народ, ви не маєте права на незалежність і ви не маєте приймати власні рішення.
So if we start that we are the brotherly nations, therefore we are the same nation, and since that is true, you are not a separate nation and have no right to sovereignty, and therefore no right to make political decisions that we do not like.
І якщо ваші рішення нам не підходять, ми маємо право застосовувати силу.
And if such decisions you are attempting to make will harm our interest, we will have to stop you by force.
Або від багатьох християн з Росії ми можемо зараз почути, що вони за мир і що вони проти війни.
Oftentimes
це також...
we hear... Oh, by all means, продовжуй.
І це також виглядає дуже духовним, тому що ми всі знаємо слова з Євангелія, що блаженні миротворці.
And oftentimes from Russian Christians, we hear the notion that they are for peace. And we can relate to that message because in the scripture, we hear that blessed are those who are peacemakers.
Але коли починаєш запитувати, що ви маєте на увазі, коли говорите, що ви за мир, то врешті ти можеш почути такі слова, що вам просто треба перестати захищатись, здайтесь Путіну, і настане мир.
But as you start digging deeper into this message of I am for peace, it quickly escalates into all you have to do is give up, surrender your weapons, and let Putin take over, and therefore you will have peace.
Або ще один дуже важливий релігійний меседж. Місія російського народу – спасти світ від західного морального розпаду.
Oh, let's take another often used religious message. The mission of the Russian people is to save the world from the moral decay of the West.
Я думаю, що цей меседж має сподобатись усім, хто переживає за моральний стан сучасного суспільства.
And this message must be very appealing to those who are concerned with the moral condition of our present-day society.
Але насправді він існує для того, щоб додати мотивацію релігійно налаштованим росіянам для цієї війни.
But the primary purpose of it is to give a religious motivation, a religious explanation to the Russian people to motivate them to do this war.
Багато росіян вірять в те, що їхня війна священна. Вони вірять, що вони меч в Божих руках, щоб карати зло і спасти українців від гріха, який нав'язує Захід.
And it succeeds, as a whole lot of Russians do believe that their war is sacred and that they are saving Ukrainians from the ruinous and sinful influence of the West.
Але за цим стоїть величезна брехня. Тому що якщо порівняти статистику абортів, розлучень, алкоголізму, злочинності, то ми побачимо, що у тій країні, яка хоче спасти весь світ від морального занепаду, статистика цих речей набагато гірша, ніж в інших країнах.
But the premise of it is false. If you look at the statistics comparing the Western countries and Russia, we can see that this country that has decided to save others from sin has in fact significantly worse rates of abortion, divorces, family violence, alcohol addiction, and crime.
І ми бачимо, що в тих містах України, куди зараз прийшов руський мір, відбувається мародерство, відбувається групове зґвалтування жінок на очах у їхніх дітей.
And as evidenced by the conditions and events in the cities and villages that are occupied by Russian forces, the amount of rapes and marauding and destruction.
Тому насправді ми бачимо не спасіння світу, а поширення моральної деградації.
And instead of saving the world, all we witness is the moral degradation.
Також цей меседж посягає такий месіанська ідея, вона посягає на роль Христа.
And also this idea attempts to take on this messianic quality of Christ.
А Христос спасає світ від гріха зовсім не силою, а стосунками любові.
But unlike the Russian world, Christ saves people from sin through relationships, through love, rather than by force.
І останній меседж. Він не релігійний, але я думаю, що він потребує богослівського осмислення.
And there's another message. I don't think it's necessarily religious in its context, but it does beg for theological consideration.
І цей меседж, мені здається, він зараз поширюється саме серед міжнародної аудиторії. І звучить він так. У війні винна російська влада, а від санкцій страждають прості, ні в чому не винні росіяни.
And this popular message is aimed mostly at the international audience. And it goes like this. It is the Russian authorities who are guilty of the war. but the sanctions are actually targeting ordinary Russians who are then suffering unjustly.
Ідея ні в чому не винних простих людей фактично говорить, що проста людина – це раб, яка не може робити вибір і не може нести відповідальність за свій вибір.
But if you dig deeper, then that's a presumption that an average citizen is actually a slave, unable to make any choices willfully, and therefore carries no consequences for these choices.
І ця ідея перекликається з ідеєю банальності зла, коли німецькі солдати вірили, що вони не роблять жодного злочину, тому що вони виконують накази.
And it sounds eerily similar to the idea of the commonplace evil, where the German soldiers from the World War II thought that they were not committing crimes just because they were simply fulfilling orders.
І в Біблії ми бачимо зовсім іншу ідею лідерства і зовсім іншу ідею відповідальності. Біблія говорить про те, що кожна людина є суб'єктом, і кожна людина може обирати між добром і злом. І кожна людина несе відповідальність перед Богом і має суспільний вплив.
But the Bible gives us a different idea as far as the responsibility goes. It's a total different principle of power and human responsibility. Every single person can make a choice. Every single person will be held responsible before God. Every single person can influence society around them.
І це та сама ідея, яку зараз захищає українське суспільство.
And actually, this is the idea that Ukrainians are standing strong to defend.
Я покажу декілька фотографій просто з звичайних там новин чи записів людей, де можна побачити, що прості люди часто виходять проти військових без зброї. І проста маленька людина часто виходить як Давид проти Голіафа, і насправді проста людина може вплинути на дуже багато речей.
And I would like to share a few pictures just to give you the idea of how various Ukrainians come up unarmed against the invaders, just to give you proof that even a single person has the power to bring on change.
Саме тому я вважаю, що богослів'я дуже важливе сьогодні. І єресь руського міра потребує богослівського осмислення і засудження цієї християнської спільноти. На жаль, під впливом цієї ідеології опинилось дуже багато християн в Росії і також немало християн в Україні і в інших країнах.
So for these reasons, I am very strongly convinced that theology is of the paramount importance at this time to help us distinguish between the good and evil, because of how the war challenges us to name good as good and evil as evil.
Ми бачимо, як слово може нести смерть багатьом людям і величезні руйнування. Але ми повинні нести те слово, яке несе життя, надію і відновлення. І нам потрібно вчити людей розрізняти одне слово від іншого.
And since, unfortunately, many Christians in Russia, Ukraine, and other nations have found themselves influenced by ideas of Russian world, and the job of theology is to root out such heresy and condemn it as a whole Christian community. We need to understand that words are powerful, and we see how the false worlds disseminated for around a decade now have led to the death of many people. Our job is to spread the good words that bring about life, hope, and restorations. We are called to teach people to think so that they can become able to distinguish the first from the letter.
Дякую за увагу.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Olha, a lot for your open position and the very brave heart that encouraged us to live and to build the future. And that's really that we have to keep in mind that we are responsible how we build and what materials we use for this building. Thank you a lot. And before we will move to the next section of our discussion, I would like to remind that we record this meeting, and in some days we will share it with you. So now we would like to open the floor for the questions that we received from our participants. With the answers, I would like to ask our speakers to be as short as possible and as precise as possible. We will take only, I think, several questions, and the rest of the questions we will write down, and maybe in a few days we will prepare the answers and we will share with all the participants of our events. But I would ask everyone to be patient about the answers, because we need more time now in the new condition to answer all the questions that we have from the previous meeting and from this meeting. So the first question I have for Marina, and this is the question I think will be about how we are dealing with the reality. And Marina, what do you think, or maybe or not what do you think, or about how are you communicating the reality of what's going on with your family, with your children, husband? I would ask the translator to translate the question for Marina.
Пані Марино, будь ласка, стоїть запитання. Як ви на даний момент справляєтесь з відчуттям реальності? Які найбільші ваші виклики в цьому? Що спонукає вас продовжувати і не здаватись? Як ви почуваєте себе під час цього травматичного стресу? Чи є у вас якась група підтримки?
Дякую.
І як ви передаєте оцю всю реальність турбот, травматичних подій та війни своїй родині, включаючи ваших дітей?
Дякую за запитання. Війну я зустріла у Херсоні, була свідком початку війни, і на той час, коли на вечір 24 лютого, коли вже Антоновка була окупована, мій чоловік був десь під Миколаєвом. То був перший виклик.
Well, the first challenge I met at the first day of war. At that moment, I was in Kherson, and my husband at that moment was actually in Mykolaiv.
За тиждень до війни дітям я почала казати, що, можливо, у випадку війни їхній батько піде воювати. Це один виклик був для мене. І коли вже ми були на шляху додому у Кривому Розі, він мені сказав, що на завтра я йду до військкомату, тому що я військовозобов'язаний офіцер і повинен робити те, що мені каже моя совість. Це був мій другий виклик.
Well, my second challenge was accepting the fact that my husband has decided to become a conscript, as he is convinced that this is what he should do and he cannot go against his own conscience. I have started to prep my children to this possibility of war and their dad getting conscripted for about a week before the war.
Третім викликом було не передати дітям свій страх. Коли чоловік пішов 25 лютого військкомат, і на вечір він вже виїхав до навчальної бази, і якби я повинна була тримати собі в руках. І було ще такий момент, що я до кінця не усвідомлювала те, що відбувається, якби була така емоційна замороженість.
And the third challenge that I faced was when my husband actually got conscripted on the 25th of February. And that fear that swelled inside me, to keep it inside and not let it come out and spill over into my children.
І для мене головним викликом стало те, щоб забезпечити точку опору для власних дітей і для батьків. Літні в мене батьки, і батько на той час потрібно було робити операцію. Його повернули з лікарні додому. 25 лютого ми організували приїзд додому з лікарні. Він був з цистостомою. Я розуміла, що в умовах війни він дуже довго не може лишатися в цьому. Це питання потрібно вирішувати. І це був третій такий терміновий виклик, який потрібно було рішати з чоловічої точки зору. Налагоджувати стосунки з лікарем, відшукувати десь лікаря, який би прооперував його в умовах воєнного стану.
And the biggest challenge that I faced was remaining that safe place, being that safe place for my children, being strong for my children as well as my elderly parents. Since they were elderly, they needed a lot of support. And my father was scheduled for surgery. And unfortunately, that could not happen at that day. And so they had to send him back home. And I had to arrange for logistics of that, as well as search for a surgeon that would actually be willing to perform this surgery in this war.
Угу. Паралельно розуміючи наслідки війни і постійний стрес, відразу у нас вдома появилося за можливості дуже багато солодощів, і діти постійно мали доступ, дозовано до шоколаду, аби мати відчуття задоволення від їжі, і таким чином стабілізувався їхній емоційний стан. Третім таким чи четвертим викликом вони були постійні. Це була трансляція дітям впевненості у завтрашньому дні, відчуття гарантія безпеки. Облаштували спочатку підвал, і потім, вже коли почали дуже недалеко від нас гуркати, бомбити, то і чоловік сказав, що потрібно виїжджати, тому що до регіону зганяють дуже багато військової техніки, а місто у нас невеличке, ми дуже відрізані від траси загальної, то, як вказує практика, на невеличкі міста розповсюджується гуманітарна криза. На той час, коли ми виїжджали з міста, то в місті вже була гуманітарна криза.
Parallel to the ideas of creating a safe place for children, maintaining a small shelter in the basement, the children were allowed to have chocolate, limited, of course, but a good deal of it, enough to maintain the endorphins, the sensation of happiness. But this projecting of confidence from me, assurances about a better tomorrow, did help calm them down. But quickly enough, my husband called me up and said that we should leave our small city because we are situated in the middle of the nowhere, and such cities quickly enough degrade to the state of humanitarian catastrophe. And by the time we were able to leave, the city was already at the edge of it.
Але найбільшим викликом стало те, що в одній з телефонній розмові я відчула, що відбувається трансформація з чоловіком. І прийшло розуміння того, що це дійсно війна. І після того, коли він сказав, що я спитала, чи є полонені, він сказав, які полонені, наразі їх немає. Я зрозуміла, що він вбиває людей.
And another big challenge that hit me during one of the conversations on the phone with my husband, the changes that happened to him. When I asked him about prisoners, and he said, what prisoners? I understood that he is actually shooting to kill.
Він знаходиться в одній з найгарячіших точок у Харківській області, недалеко від Харкова. І це питання, мені було внутрішньо перейти. І усвідомлюючи те, що християнський наратив, він завжди засуджує ту людину, яка бере автомати до рук, яка йде захищати, і дуже постійно, якби і з боку нехристиян, з боку віруючих людей, де такий наратив, є відсоток людей, які засуджують. А з огляду на те, що у нас відбувся розкол у родині, його батьки зайняли повністю пропутінську позицію, мої батьки проукраїнські, то складнощі миробудування такі вони залишилися. Але потрібно було донести до дітей, якби, що постійно потрібно транслювати дітям відчуття захищеності, чоловіку те, що ти не є в стресі, що все нормально, все гаразд, ми все пройдемо, все добре, якби ти робиш добру справу, ти виконуєш свою роботу, і це тобі, ну якби це я не з позиції якогось там християнського осуду, який з усіх боків, якщо ми відкриємо зранку Фейсбук, то побачимо заклики до миру друзького і все таке інше.
And it was hard for me to accept that he is currently in the places that see a lot of action. He is currently near Kherson. And the outward pressure for me is from the legacy of Christian narrative that is not very accepting, but rather condemning people who take up arms. Also, it is hard for me because our relatives are split. My husband's parents are very much for Putin. My parents, on the contrary, are very much for Ukraine. And my job, as I see it right now, is to maintain this confidence and delegate this confidence to my children that it will be still okay. Maintain this confidence and translate to my husband that I will get through this. I am all right. But as I open Facebook or any other media, and I get bombarded by the messages that all we need to do in order to get peace is to surrender, it is hard to stomach. And maintaining this work towards establishing peace is hard.
Yeah. Thank you, Marina.
Thank you, Marina, for your answer. Yes, I have two more questions that I would like to ask. The one is for Tatiana Gerasimchuk. Tatiana, do you think that there is the tension between those who stay and those who left the Ukraine, and how it can be managed if it's so, and what can be prayed for? Switch on the microphone, please. Tanya, please switch on the microphone.
Sorry. Thank you very much. As far as I know, there is no tension so far. And we should not forget that many of those who left are not classical passive refugees now, because substantial number of them is involved in volunteer work, helping other refugees, doing all kinds of other works. For example, I know one of our colleagues in the seminary. She's now in Germany with her children, and in addition to what she's doing, her volunteer activities, she's helping the local refugee community by teaching Ukrainian children the Bible and other useful subjects. Maybe as time goes, the gap between those who stayed and those who left might grow and become wider. But I hope there won't be significant clashes or conflicts. And yes, we definitely need to pray for both groups and for good and reliable communication between them, and for ability people to Make every effort to understand and respect and appreciate the life and experience of each other.
Yeah.
That's it.
Thank you, Tanya.
Uh-huh.
I would like to ask everyone, because we have a lot of the question, but because of the lack of the time, I would ask Taras to finish our meeting. Please, Taras, your time, your turn.
Thank you. Thank you everyone who joined our second webinar. We plan to have at least several more, maybe every 2-3 weeks, with volunteers and other groups of people who are involved in the war. And we are not tired to remind to our international community, it is not a situation. It is not an inner conflict in Ukraine. It is not a Ukrainian question, like the Kremlin says, that needs to be resolved. And if you follow me on Facebook, I try to remind that Ukraine now, it is not about Ukraine and Russia. It is a moral question. It is the question of the future of the church. How would you, as the Christendom, relate to those who are killed through the ethnocide and through aggression? Are we just concerned and comfortable with some support, or in the post-truth society, in the post-truth politics, we keep faithful to the truth? And the last comment, we will not be tired to remind that biblical truth is not about the silence, as many Russian pastors told me that now silence is wisdom. You cannot share the gospel if you are silent. You cannot share the good news if you are silent. Yes, it is important what we do as much as it is important what we say. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the Bible. We would not have the preaching of Jesus if we were just silent. And biblical truth is also that Abel did not commit suicide. He was killed by his brother. Jesus did not do a suicide. He was betrayed by Judah. Yes, God has it in his plan, but biblical truth has specific names, specific situations, specific locations. And I fully support our women voices, so that we need to be on the side of truth, on the side of those who suffer, and raise the word and voice against dehumanizing, depersonalizing, de-evaluating propaganda. And there will be no peace if we don't talk. Yes, as the church, we will have to go back to peace building. We have no choice. Someday, sometime, but a part of the peace building should be telling the truth. So this is what will make the peace long and stable. Thank you for your time, and see you the next time. Check your spam folders, check your email. We will be there soon. God bless you.